As we hinted in the previous video, the multiplier effect does work in both directions. So if we have spending increases, we're going to notice that equilibrium or aggregate income should increase by a greater amount. If we have spending decreases, however, we're going to notice just the opposite. Equilibrium income should fall by a larger amount. So a decrease in spending during an economic downturn could cause a larger drop in income, and if consumers increase their savings during a recession, they may inadvertently make the recession worse off because of the spending multiplier. And this is going to lead us to a few things that we can talk about, and this is exactly something that we did see with the financial crisis that we had in the 2000s. So the Great Recession, as they sort of call it, the 2007 to 2009 recession. So we noticed that consumption and savings are going to be graphed in this particular illustration right here. We notice that consumption fairly high, savings is fairly relatively low compared to consumption, because here in the US we have a consumption-based economy. When the recession hits, how do we protect ourselves? We notice that the recession has begun. Our consumption is going to decline, but we want to protect ourselves, so our savings is going to increase. However, due to the spending multiplier being sort of relevant in this sort of case, we're gonna notice a little bit of a paradox in this case. So when you decrease your consumption, you're gonna want to protect yourself by increasing your savings. So individually, savings should go up. However, savings isn't going to be a portion, or it's not going to be a component that is affected by the multiplier. Remember that only spending components are affected by the multiplier: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So as consumption goes down, that will be affected by the spending multiplier, and that's going to cause equilibrium incomes to be lower as a result. But if equilibrium and aggregate incomes are lower, that tells us that savings as a whole for the entire country should be lower as well. So that's something unusual. You yourself increase your own savings, but savings for the entire country is going to fall because of that. And that's going to be something known as a paradox, more not commonly known as the paradox of thrift. If households decide to save more, suppose during a recession time, the spending multiplier becomes smaller, which leads to reduced output and income, which then leads to even less savings. So let's go ahead and talk about the mechanisms and channels of the paradox of thrift. So paradox of thrift. So something a little bit unusual in this case, where individually you do what is right for you, but it's going to cause huge impacts for the entire macro economy. So with the paradox of thrift, we sort of begin with a negative demand shock. So negative demand shock. And this can occur for a variety of reasons, but this negative demand shock, we can say, go ahead and say maybe a recession sort of hits, or we can just say maybe consumer confidence drops. Consumer confidence drops or decreases. So it doesn't really matter what the negative demand shock is going to be. We just need to have some type of negative demand shock. Consumer confidence decreasing. Maybe there's something that's going to happen within that that's going to affect your consumption. Essentially here, consumer confidence decreases as a negative demand shock. When a negative demand shock happens, what are you going to do as a result? How do you protect yourself against a recession? You're going to increase your savings. So individual savings rise. Individual savings increase or rise. So here you decide, oh no, a recession is happening. Let's go ahead and protect myself. I'm going to increase my own savings. However, when you increase your own savings, that comes at the expense of consumption. So individual consumption drops. Individual consumption drops. So remember, we have y equals c plus s. If y is staying constant as of just right now, and we increase s, that means c has to go down. So here, you protect yourself from a recession by increasing your savings and cutting back on a few of your consumption items. However, remember that consumption is affected by the multiplier. So when consumption drops, c goes down. It'll be multiplied by the multiplier, which tells us that equilibrium or aggregate income falls as well. So equilibrium income drops. So equilibrium income drops. So C goes down, affected by the multiplier. Whatever C goes down by, you multiply it by the spending multiplier, and that tells us how much equilibrium income is going to fall by. However, remember, if equilibrium income drops, remember we still have Y equals C plus S. So if Y goes down, that tells us that C and S also have to go down as well. So total savings drop because total income is lower. So total savings drop because total income is lower. Because total income is lower. And that's something very, very unusual, which is why they call it a paradox of thrift. Individual savings rise, but total savings, aggregate savings within the entire country has fallen as a result of the spending multiplier effect. And once again, this is just showing us that the multiplier effect does work in both directions. We typically have spending increases most of the time within the country, but we do have instances where spending may go down due to results such as a negative demand shock or a recession happening within the country. And that's where a paradox of thrift may happen, which will inadvertently make a recession much, much worse off than just a typical recession that may happen. So with all of this, we've learned about the multiplier effect, all the ins and outs of that. And now that we have an idea of that, we can go ahead and build up our full macroeconomic equilibrium, which is going to go ahead and include the rest of our macroeconomic variables. So government spending, net exports, and we're also going to take a look at a few idiosyncratic things such as taxes and also a balanced budget multiplier. So ties along to the idea of the spending multiplier, but just put in a little slightly different manner. So I'll go ahead, end the video here, and see you guys in the next few lectures.